Hello and welcome to Weird Heat. This episode is about disappointment, and Weird Heat is a show about life, creativity, and everything else.
Yeah,
I'm
just
already,
like that, I think they're already let down.
I'm let down. I was going to do that in reverse. I was going to do explain the show and then do the theme.
Well,
and see.
shit, you had that whole thing set up in your head, and then it completely didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, and now you're disappointed and you're sad.
Funny how that happens. So Max, my good co-host and friend here, Max Scoville, I'm Brian Altano, and we are going to talk about disappointment for as long as we can until we let ourselves down or let you down, or we're really just going to swim around in this
We
topic a
might
little
keep
bit.
going after we've let you down, but bear with us,
Yeah, we might let ourselves down even more after this. See, we're just doing it now.
Yeah.
I want to explain disappointment and how, for me personally, it begins almost immediately with the spelling of the word. When you said to me, I want to do an episode on disappointment to follow up our episode on optimism, I was like, that's perfect because they go hand in hand. Those are two very conjoined themes. Immediately I got a little scared, and not because I felt vulnerable or worried, but because every time I go to spell disappointment, I put two S's in and I fuck it up. Every single time, right out the gate. So right off the bat, I type disappointment, which I do all the time, probably more than I should, and I do DISSAPPOINTMNT. I had to look multiple times to make sure that was good. And what happens when you do that, Max?
It's you get a little red squiggly line.
You get a squiggly.
You did it wrong, or it just corrects it. It just pretends that nothing went wrong and everything's fine. But
You
really,
get some wavy red blood waters underneath your word.
yeah, the scary snake of the wrong word.
Things go awry at sea on a smooth sailing day. So right off the bat, I get screwed up by that word, and I started to think about that squiggly line and how it disappoints me because when it pops in, it's me going, I got this. The snake shows up. I go, no, I don't. And I started to realize like that snake is so indicative of what disappointment as a concept is out in the real world. You don't always see that snake, right? That's a sort of symbolic, invisible, hallucinatory, metaphorical snake.
Yeah, and the thing with disappointment though is that it can go two different ways. And we're talking about this. You disappoint yourself whenever you do that.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's because you're like, man, I can't spell a word. I'm an adult man who can't spell the word right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also expect the word to be spelled a certain way.
Yeah.
So there's kind of the internal version of disappointment where you're like, man, I let myself down. And then there's also the fact that disappointment isn't spelled with two S's like it is in your perfect vision of reality.
No.
So,
I feel like it should be, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's funny because I feel like we look at disappointment like it is this kind of this finite concept. Like it's a known quantity. Like disappointment is almost up there with like, oh, it's like with sadness or with like and it's easy to forget that it's an immensely complex thing.
Yes, it's not life and death or life or death, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that a situation or a personal goal or an accolade or something failing means it is dead for good. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, you're correct. There are two types of disappointment. And I want to talk about the first one a little bit, which is personal disappointment. Personal disappointment is probably the one that people, or definitely the one people experience the most, because you are the one letting yourself down the most often, right? Unless you are like incredibly narcissistic, cocky, and confident to a point that you're borderline disgusting to everybody else, you are constantly letting yourself down.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a certain if you're completely devoid of introspection or self-criticism, then maybe you never let yourself down, and that sounds great.
Yeah, good
you're
work.
Probably a psychopath.
Thanks.
But, but yeah, no, I think there is that level of like, oh, like I did this thing wrong and I hate myself for it.
And it's microcosmic, right? Like it could be something that happens that's big and sweeping, like applying for a job or trying to learn a new skill, or I don't know, just bumping into something is a disappointment. It's a personal failure on a microscopic level. Now, that doesn't mean that that's like a sort of permanent scar on you, right? If you're just looking at the bumping into something thing, which is a very, very minute, very tiny way of disappointment, it's basically you telling yourself, like, I screwed up. But then the next time you turn that corner in that hallway, your brain is going, I learned from that, and I'm not going to do it again. Then you might do it again. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes this thing where, like, now I'm incredibly disappointed in
I don't
myself.
know. I think that's a separate concept entirely. Is when it's repeated disappointment and something's gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Like there's that whole thing where it's like, oh, if you're doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, that's insanity. I think with disappointment, it's giving a name to that sensation of not having the outcome you hoped for.
Right.
You know, like that's
Right.
kind of it. Whether or not that's your fault or the world's fault, you know. But when it comes down to your own thing, then it's kind of like, well, you know, what did you do wrong? And I think a lot of people are prone to sort of not so much examine what went wrong, what it could have done differently, but to like really just wallow in the shame of personal disappointment.
Yep. And it just becomes this sort of scar or tattoo. It becomes this lifelong thing. Whereas if you're able to control it or sort of analyze it from afar, and sometimes that's a few minutes or a few years, disappointment can be, or I believe is, the single most motivating thing on earth, right? I think that like when something goes terribly and you fail at it, it's a great instructor. I've always looked at sort of the way you can learn from people who are great examples is as powerful as the way you can learn from people who are bad examples, right? Like I'm an older brother, and I spent a lot of my life fucking up so that my brothers who are younger than me could be like, oh, I'm not going to do that. That's bad. And I disappointed myself in doing that, but I also helped them to learn. So I think like if you look at something that you're doing and it's disappointing you, you can either be like, I'm a failure at this forever. You know, like I can't dance, right? So I just don't try to. But there's other times where I'm like, I'm bad at this, and that's a motivation to get better.
Right. I think also the key word there is failure.
Yeah.
And I think that failure is a different. It's like disappointment is like failure crossed with hubris. Because like there's the there's this thing you're like, I can do this, and then you don't do it, and you're like, I did not do that, and now I am sad because of it.
Right.
It's not just as simple as like doing your absolute best and realizing, just kind of just being like, I'm putting it out there. It could go wrong. And then you're like, well, it didn't work out. I guess I failed and I can try again. I think disappointment is you're like, I got this. And then you don't get it.
And then you don't got this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you can say to yourself like, I don't got this, and then you just die like being like, I don't got this. That's your last words.
The world's worst last words.
Also multiplied by the world's worst old man impression.
Yeah, I don't got this.
I don't got. Or you can be like, okay, this is the ultimate motivator. Like I don't know, there was a long time where I was just like, I'm a fat Italian from the East Coast. I'm like, that's me. That's who I am. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I would look in the mirror and there'd be like a jiggle in my neck, and I was like, yeah, I shouldn't have like had dinner twice at 4 a.m. last night. I shouldn't have had 15 vodka sodas or like had a cheesesteak or like gotten in an argument over pizza and then stress ate an entire one by myself.
Right.
And so you kind of say to yourself like, either this is who I am, I'm always kind of operating at 60%, or I can go like, which is something I did. I was like, what if I tried to fix this? But there's other things that I've realized that like I'm just not good at. Like I played guitar for a couple years. And I bought a guitar like the day I sat down to be like, this is how my album Misanthrope is going to come together. It's missing live guitar. And I sat down and I plugged it in. I started strumming it. I didn't know what I was doing. It was bad. I actually took guitar lessons in middle school, and my teacher moved away, and I realized that I wasn't going to guitar lessons. I was going to therapy. Like
Sure.
I was basically meeting this guy once a week. We would put guitars on our laps at this place called S&G Music Studio in Wyckoff, New Jersey. And we would just talk. And I don't think he wanted to do that. I just ended up just talking to him. So I didn't really ever learn guitar. So when it came time to learn or teach myself, which is the way I've always taught myself, is through music, right? I sat down, I started playing. I went to Guitar Center, bought a new guitar, bought like a thing to plug it in my laptop, sat down, started playing over my songs, and I was like, oh, that's right. I'm bad at this.
Yeah.
Like I got all the equipment for it. And then the very next day, I got a Twitter notification from a guy named Thomas Rakowitz, who's a friend of the show. And he was like, hey, I covered your new single. And he just fucking destroyed it with his guitar. And I took my guitar and I brought it to Salvation Army. Like literally the next day, it was just gone. Mm-hmm. And I was like, there's no reason to have this anymore. And that was a disappointment where I was like, I'm bummed with myself, but I'm also, that allowed me to free myself up so that somebody better could come in to take the job for me and help me out. And he ended up doing a bunch of songs with me. He still continues to do songs with me. I think I'll get him on the song that I do for this episode. So bringing it all together. But that's tough, right? Is kind of that part where you have to say like, shit, I did fail this. But then what do you do with that information?
Yeah, I think at a creative level it's again, it's sort of microcosmic to be, and with on a visual side of things, there's like, yes, I I have an idea of what this is going to look like. I want to paint this picture. I want to draw this picture. I want to sketch this thing, whatever. And you put it down on paper, and it's not there yet.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit, and you can kind of maybe you'll even do the thing where you're like, I love this thing I drew. Maybe it looks different from how you pictured it in your head, or it looks exactly like it, and you walk away from it and you come back. And there's no better example of this than art you once thought was good.
Yeah.
Stuff that you were like in high school, you're like, this is the best thing I've ever painted. No one will ever top this. And you look at it 2 weeks later, 5 years later, 10 years later, whatever. And then you're like, this is embarrassing and laughable. And it's always about kind of, constantly iterating and developing on top of that.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I mean, I'm in your home right now, and I don't actually see like a ton of your art everywhere.
I don't want to fucking hang that shit up.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. Because I've always been the same way, where I actually, it's weird because the only art that I have hanging in my entire apartment that I made myself is I drew a bunch of Star Wars characters when I was 10, and my wife got it framed. And it's like so far removed from my current skill set and the things I'm trying to achieve that I don't constantly judge it, or I look at it in a sort of jokey way. But I find that surrounding myself in my own art lets me build up a disappointment to it until I have enough humility to not want to look at it ever again. And it's the same thing with listening to old songs and old music.
Yeah.
There's a distance that you can have from your own work where you inevitably become sort of disappointed in it in a way that you're like, I'm not happy I did that. But it's a building block along the road to where you want to be
so
now.
I had an interesting experience in high school with art where for the longest time I was kind of on this track where I was like, I want to be like an illustrator, comics artist, whatever. I want to make manga. Like I want to be like the next Akira Toriyama. I don't think I ever even thought that, but I was drawing a lot of like, Dragon Ball fan art and drawing things, trying to draw in a style that wasn't necessarily the style I was good at, and not really. And there's that kind of mentality of like, I could practice life drawing. I could do the eat your vegetables, do the legwork to learn how to draw better. And I didn't do that. I just would kind of do the stuff that I like to draw. And I'd look at it, I'm like, this doesn't look how I want it to look. And I hate it. And I think I reached a point where I was just like, I hate what I'm drawing. I hate everything that I'm making. I don't like it. I'm embarrassed by it, and I need to not do it. And I just stopped. And I think this is for probably about a year and a half, where for the longest time I was the kid who was drawing in his notebook. I carried a sketchbook everywhere. I was always sketching and doodling on notebook pages and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I just dropped it. I was like, I'm not good at it. Fuck it. I'm done. And I walked away from it. And I was still stuck in class plenty of times. So I think in math class I gradually just started kind of doodling in margins some more. And I reached this point where I was like, well, if I'm not good at drawing, I might as well draw kind of shitty. So I started intentionally drawing things as poorly as possible, like a child would.
Right.
Because I thought it was funny. I mean, I distinctly remember discovering the crayon Photoshop brush tool and drawing really inappropriate fake children's drawings.
Yeah.
And being like, well, I can't draw well anyway because I'm using a mouse, and also I can't draw. So, I'm kind of doing my own thing. And then gradually I'd sort of keep doing that, and then suddenly I was like, oh, crap, I'm actually trying again.
Right, which is pretty fascinating because there's that sort of mantra in art that's like you have to learn the rules before you can learn to break them,
mm-hmm.
right? Which is, I think, you had the foundation down and you're like, I want to regress, take all this away. I want to make outsider art, basically.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that carry into the work you do now, not necessarily as an illustrator, but when you Photoshop stuff, it's really hard to make stuff intentionally bad. But you try to get this thing that sort of feels like, oh, this is this angry, aggro 17-year-old who snuck into school to use Photoshop on the teacher's computer, and he made this fucked up thing, right? And that's that stems from you basically honing disappointment as a weapon into something that you could utilize as a skill. Mm-hmm. Which is bizarre.
No, I mean, it's funny because the most disappointing art I do nowadays is when I try to do something that I should know that I can't do. And obviously I could if I wanted to actually pursue it. And this is what was weird with art school for me, is that I was they're like, all right, now it's time for studio drawing classes. And I was like, yes. And I'm not terrible at that. It's just a matter of practice. You have to keep at it. You have to to learn light logic and to learn, the way to shade something properly. I just don't want to do it, Mm-hmm. So instead it's more like finding a compromise between what I know I'm capable of drawing and what I want to draw, and finding this shaky balance between the thing in my head and the thing that I know is going to wind up there. And it's almost like there's a kind of just almost contrarian approach to just drawing.
Yeah.
Where I'm in my head, I'm like, I want to draw like I want to draw like Frank Miller. Like I want to go in there. I want to draw like incredible, just like stylistic brushstrokes and just like I want to draw the really cool thing. And then I'm like, yeah, but I can't. So I the second I start convincing myself that I can, then I'm setting myself up for disappointment. So instead, I do this thing where I'm almost like, I'm gonna see how ugly this can be. I'm gonna fuck this up, and then along the way, I'll be like, I'll have fun with it. I'll find flourishes that I enjoy and things, lines to put down that I'm like, maybe it doesn't look the way I particularly intended it, but I don't hate it completely because it's not a failure,
Because you're not looking at it for the things that you didn't do right. You're looking at it for the things that you did. You know, I think about it like this. Like, do you think every time Rob Liefeld sits down to draw a comic, do you think he's disappointed in his feet?
Dude, you literally read my mind.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about
or is he proud of the pouches?
Yeah.
Right? I think he's proud of the pouches. I think that he sits there and he goes, I drew some fucking awesome pouches today. I drew 70 pouches on cable. Or
you make great music, but you also don't play guitar.
Yeah.
So you kind of pick your battles.
Well, and exactly. And I think you have to sort of celebrate what you're great at. And that doesn't mean give up on something once or twice, because that's where it gets very difficult too, right? And now I think we'll get back into creativity in a second, but the second type of disappointment, and this is the one that you probably don't experience as much, but is sometimes or almost always infinitely more crushing, probably because you have no control of it, and because you do hope for the best with it, is disappointment in the outside world. And that can come from a friend, a relationship, a coworker, a movie, a video game, anything really. And I think like what gets difficult with that is that some of those things are expectations that you don't have control of. You build up this thing to this great heights. And other things are reliance, in that you hope that someone will be there for you. Like you're my best friend, and for you to disappoint me would mean that I would have to do something. I would have to rely on you for something, or you would have to basically fail at doing something that I had told myself is part of your role to me as a friend.
Yeah, I think a disappointment with anything sort of externally, you get into this, it's not so much a feeling as it is a relationship with everything around you,
right?
And like, I mean, when there's that old kind of cliche of like, oh, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. And typically that's something that's said to you by somebody who's in a position where they can be mad at you. You don't say that to the guy at Subway. If he fucks up your sandwich, you're not like, hey, Chad, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointment. You're like, I'm mad, you fucked up my sandwich. There's no trust there to be disappointed. Maybe you call up customer service and put on airs and you're like, yeah, I really love Subway, I come here all the time, and you're one of your sandwich artists is a fraud. But like, no, I mean, you do that with friends or relatives. Like and that's because there is that sense of trust that's in place. And if they do disappoint you, it's almost worse than being mad, because you feel like you're like, whose fault is this? Is it my fault for trusting you, or is it your fault for betraying that trust?
Yeah. And there's also disappointing them, which is the kind of thing that can like haunt you forever. Like there are times I let people down. Like I'll tell a real quick story, but every year at the end of E3, Comic-Con, Gamescom, all of our live shows, we have huge production crews that come in and tear down the set. And you and I always stick around and we help out for a little bit. And people are always kind of surprised to see us, because they're like, the talent is helping to strike the set. And I was like, first of all, like I don't like being called talent, because everyone here is talented. It's just, I know it's just a stupid name, but I just don't like it. And you and I kind of push back against it. We rip out wires and plugs, and there's something kind of heavy metal about the whole thing.
There's
cathartic
something
about
just
tearing down a room.
Yeah, it's very cathartic. You're ripping up just hundreds of feet of gaffer tape all over the place, and getting your hands like literally dirty after a bunch of kind of dainty, arguably not bullshit, like not work. It's bullshit. It's like fluff.
Exactly.
Like,
it's this.
Talk to the cast of The Walking Dead. Oh, look at me. I had a makeup artist do my makeup, and it's like, I don't know, that doesn't feel like work,
right? And so I was in Germany 2 years ago for Gamescom, and we finished our live show around noon on Friday, which was pretty much unheard of, but I think just the way the time zone shit worked out, we got out early. And I said goodbye to everybody. I said good work, and I went outside to catch a cab so I could go spend a day in Germany before I had to fly to the next city the next day. And I got in the cab, and I got about half a mile from the place we were shooting in the studio, and I was immediately hit with like the biggest wave of disappointment in myself for not sticking around to help the crew, for not like finishing the show, to getting to like the finish line and giving up. And it's like the kind of thing that still haunts me. And I know I hurt people. Like I know that like a lot of them were just kind of like, oh, that was shitty. But for me, it's like one of those things that like top 10 time machine, go back and fix kind of moments for personal life, you know? And I think that like disappointment in yourself, multiplied by disappointment in the outside world, those things come together. And I think that is what, like, number one of disappointment in yourself, number two, that's disappointing in the outside world. That is how those worlds come together to create the disappointment you feel after a failed relationship. Like it's a little from column A and a little from column B, because you expect so much of yourself and so much of that other person, and you kind of both let each other down. And that could be a friendship, it could be a marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, it could be an employee job, you know, relationship, a boss or something, like teacher, student, anything like that. You both come in from certain angles, and you have expectations, and one of you lets the situation down. And it becomes like incredibly difficult to overcome that. You know, that's something like it's a guilt I still deal with. And for everyone else, they're probably just like, oh, dude, it wasn't a big deal. You know? And so I have to rectify that in my head.
You always hone in on the dumbest things. I mean, it's the same logic as that kind of like awkward, stupid thing. You're like, why did I say that? You kick yourself for it. But no, I mean, that's, again, I think that comes down to, you feel like you were disappointing other people and you were also disappointing yourself. And these sort of abstract disappointments sort of teamed up with each other. But really there's also that, like, I don't know, there's when you look at like external disappointment and like disappointment with reality, there's like there's the kind when there's the thing that you picture in your head, you know, expectation versus reality. I think that's the one that's like most people are probably thinking of when it comes to
and that's like, you know, you spend 6 months planning a vacation and you get there and it's raining the whole time. Or, you know, you spend 5 months hyping a movie and you go see it and it's bad. And, you know, you can either say to yourself, like, I liked it, or you can get angry at the people that hated it, or, you know, there's a bunch of different reactions
we've known we were going to be tackling this concept for a while. Like this was, we kind of were like, we should talk about disappointment. Right. Particularly because, you know, this is our second episode of the show, and we have we didn't really know what to expect. A lot of stuff to expect. And, I don't think we're particularly disappointed with how it's going. I think it's more of just sort of, it's different from expected, you know? Yeah. I don't know what I expected. I don't know exactly what I was looking, I don't know what I pictured, you know? When I think back to being a kid, I don't remember how I pictured my adult self. So I can't really tell you what happened there. Yeah. But there's always that feeling of like, well, this is decidedly different, though I don't know what I expected in the first place. And I think that's the expectation, obviously, is sort of the root of disappointment. But there's sort of a third part there, you know, if there's expectation, reality, and then there's also what's the difference between the reality and the expectation. And I think that really that's where you find the sort of the amount of disappointment. Right. And I think it's important to note that the road to disappointment is sort of driven by confidence. And if you're able to crystallize that confidence, like a lot of people think when they're working on something creative, they're like, this is going to change the world. And that's a fucking awesome feeling. Like, grab that and hold on to it, because when it goes away, at least it gave you that for a bit. Max Landis, before Bright came out, said, I think this is my Star Wars. It wasn't. You know, it wasn't even close. Well, it's also, he's comparing it to a thing that exists out there. Exactly. So, I mean, like, ultimately, when you're creating something, you're going like, and, you know, when we were going to the show, we were like, this is going to be this is going to be that, this is going to do this amount of numbers over here, it's going to do this, and this. And the response is incredible, but also, like, it's never really what you think it's going to be. And not to say it's worse or better, it's just different. It's different. Different is the key thing there. No, I've tried very consciously, kind of for a lot of my life, to not expect things and not build up anything too concrete. I do like to. It's funny because I do like to, like, if I'm going on a trip or if I'm going to some place I haven't been, I do like to sort of know what it looks like, you know, to have an idea. And that's kind of also funny because if you're like, oh, I'm going to this restaurant, and you pull up the pictures on Yelp or whatever, you're like, I have an idea in my head of what it's going to be like at this place, and maybe, you know, like, maybe you're going to go meet some people you haven't met, like it's a dinner date or whatever, and you're like, oh, I have an idea of sort of how this is going to go. And the more information you put in, the more you have this construct in your head of what it's
Yeah.
going to be. And inevitably, the further it's going to be from reality.
Yeah.
So if you go in and you're kind of like, well, I know the address of the restaurant. I don't know what the decor is. I didn't look at the menu. I don't really put a whole lot of thought into these people I'm meeting.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of go in with a blank slate. Then you're like less likely to be ultimately let down.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to be surprised one way or the other. But if you're like, I'm going to have the best time of my life, and then you don't, then you don't.
And we know, and we've worked with people who are like sort of like I guess it's what, type A. They're like complete control freaks. They sort of identify every single bullet point of every little thing, and then ultimately chaos ensues.
Yeah.
And shit goes different. And when
Life
you're looking at
finds a
those,
way.
life finds a way. When you're looking at those pictures in the restaurant, you can't hear the music that's too loud, or like smell the cigarette smoker they put you next to, or see that like the couple next to you is too loud or something like that. So many different factors can change. Maybe your dinner comes out later than your dates did. Everything gets fucked up. Like I actually disappointed my wife a few days ago. It was Valentine's Day. I had an idea of what the day was going to be like. I've been eating healthy all year. We were going to get pizza together for the first time that year, or this year. I was ecstatic. And then I walked to the train after work, and there was 200 people there, which always means that it's late. So it was broken. Every train came by. It was just wall-to-wall packed with people. I said to myself, I'm going to hop on the train. I'm going to go home. On the way home, I'm going to stop at the flower shop, and I'm going to grab some flowers.
On Valentine's Day.
On Valentine's Day.
That's a nice idea. It's
right.
cute.
Right.
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
Fucking stupid of me. Side note, like I get my wife flowers a lot throughout the year, and like there are dudes that stop at like a gas station, they get like a teddy bear that day, and they're fucking heroes. I fucked up that day, and it's like, dude, you're in the doghouse. So I went to go get flowers. Immediate disappointment. Huge line down the block. They tripled the prices of everything. Everything that was left was just like wilted Walking Dead shit. So I said, fuck it. I walked all the way home. It was cold. It was like windy. I walked in the door. I threw my bag on the ground, and I was like, I tried to get you flowers, and I couldn't. And then my headphones got stuck on my sunglasses and just dangled around and whipped my face. And I was like, fucking shit. Happy Valentine's Day. And my wife immediately was like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't, like, you're totally right.
Yeah, you didn't get her flowers. You just got her a bad mood.
Yeah, I got her. I walked in this tornado of fucking Tasmanian shit.
Oh, yeah.
And so I woke up the next day and I was like, this is stupid of me. But what if I got flowers today on the 15th? So on the way home from work, I went back to the florist who had brand new flowers. No one was in line because no one is as stupid as me. The flowers were like $21, and I got this huge, beautiful bouquet, and I walked down Market Street, and women all up and down the street had this amazing reaction where they looked at me and smiled because they were like, that's a good man right there. And then they did the thing where they realized it's the 15th. Those are I fucked up last night flowers.
Ooh.
And so I had disappointed her the night before. I disappointed everyone on that street, but then I walked in the door and I was like, honey, I love you. And I gave her flowers. And it wasn't Valentine's Day anymore, but they're still there now.
Yeah.
And I tried to fix something that I fucked up as best I could.
Well, you tried. Yeah, see, I did the opposite. Me and my fiance, we were like, let's not do gifts this year.
Yep.
We got other stuff to worry about. And I fucking cheated and I ordered her flowers. So the flowers showed up and she's like, "What? You got me flowers? I had no idea." And I'm like, "Haha, it's Valentine's Day." The jokes I literally
Fooled you.
I literally wrote on the card, I said, "Dear Jenny, I love you, and I know we said we weren't doing gifts this year, but you're not the boss of me. I don't give a shit.
Yep.
I'm going to go and smoke stoves behind the Quick Stop with the boys." I wrote that. So then it was kind of like this kind of like aloof, like, haha,
Did you
a joke. I got her tulips as a goof.
Did you go behind that Quick Stop?
No, man, I hung out with you, and we, talked about our feelings and shit. Like, I got you flowers, though.
Beautiful. We have a quote here from Sylvia Plath. It says,
Oh, good. That old ray of sunshine. That fucking oven inspector. What does she have to say
said,
about disappointment?
if you expect nothing from somebody, you are never disappointed. That's
Well, see, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm like, Sylvia Plath, she writes depressing poetry. What should she possibly have to say? And I went in with lowered expectations, and I wasn't disappointed. Mm-hmm. She had to find a quote from a talented woman.
I asked the much more positive group of people on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/weirdheat. Go support us. And Austin Ernst said, I feel you can avoid disappointment by surrounding yourself in positive energy, whether it be people, hobbies, anything really. On top of that, staying true to you and not over-pursuing is a huge thing as well. Keeping yourself in situations where you control the level of possible disappointment could also be the key. And I think he really taps into a lot of the stuff we were talking about earlier of sort of like knowing your comfort zone. But that's kind of a dangerous box too, right? Because then you kind of don't really reach outside of it.
Yeah, I think that what we're looking at here is something that I like to call tactical slacking, which is if you try to go for, and this is something that's impressed on people at a very young age, is that you're looking at it and you're like, oh, you want to, like, there's the idea of like a passing grade, and then there's the idea of like a very good grade. And a lot of people are like, you got to get an A+. A+ is the best grade you can get, so why wouldn't you get the absolute best? And it's like, well, fucking all sorts of reasons, to condition yourself into thinking that there is a perfect, that there's like an S rank, that there is a situation which you can go through the world and always achieve the absolute best through hard work is a fallacy, right there.
Right.
And in the reality, if you get if you get a C, you might not get into Harvard or anything, but you'll pass. And then anything on top of that is going to be like a nice bonus. And this isn't the best, advice academically at all.
You're
really.
Literally a college dropout.
Right. But it will
okay.
keep you sane. I figured it out. I don't know. It's kind of like, it's, obviously apply yourself in school, kids. Hang out and do your homework and whatever. But like, my fiance has this saying, and she had this through grad school, which was C's get degrees. And the thing is, in high school, if you're doing AP stuff, you obviously want to work really, really hard and get good grades and then work towards getting into good college. And in a good college, you want to do that towards a good grad school. But once you're in fucking grad school, you're just working towards finishing grad school. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you get an A or a C. As long as you're passing, you're passing.
Yeah.
And like maybe if somebody, like if you've got like a scholarship in place or if you're looking at some other program after that, then it becomes an issue. But the reality is, it's not a matter of like passing with flying colors and like killing yourself to achieve something that in the grand scheme of things you don't really care about that much. It's not why bother. It's just really kind of picking your battles.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean lower the bar for everything. It means cut yourself some fucking slack. Mm-hmm. Like give her. I went to school with this kid in fourth grade. We had a spelling test every single week, and it was 10 words. You had to spell them right. The teacher would say them out loud. You'd write them on the piece of paper. And this kid got hundreds every single time. And they would read the grades in front of the whole class, which is just shitty. I don't know if they still do that, but god damn it, what a fucking debilitating thing. And I can write pretty well. I write good until the word, disappointment pops up, of course.
You literally started this episode talking about how you can't spell that great.
I know. I also talked about how I'm going to disappoint myself in this episode, so fuck yeah. So this kid named Jason, he got through every test that whole year, and then one of the words came up, and I don't know why we did this towards the end of the year, but the teacher said Thanksgiving, and he was like, I got this, and just rushed through the thing, and he wrote Thanksgiving. And I can't read Thanksgiving without seeing Thanksgiving in it, because she said, Jason, 90 out of 100, you spelled Thanksgiving. And everyone in the class was like, oh, bah, 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 because we knew that sucked so much for that kid who had gotten perfect scores every time. And for the rest of us, it was all like 60s, 70s, 80s, 50s,
Yeah, and you're
20s.
all probably jealous of him because he does so well.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And he had a fucking breakdown. Like, he had a panic attack breakdown, went in the hallway, cried on his pants and shit like that. Just a wreck. And then he went on to be probably rich and famous and invented like space microchips or something like that. Smart dude. But that day I watched what it's like to be disappointed in yourself over something that tiny and sort of insignificant. And I kind of taught myself like, oh, it's okay to not be where that guy's going, and it's something I used to say to somebody like Greg Miller, who Greg Miller to me was always a guy that would drive like, 75 miles an hour in a 50, right? Not actually, creatively, right? With his passion. And then I'd be like, well, Greg's going this fast. I want to go like 65, 70. Because I'm like, that's too fast for me. But these people over here are fucking slow. Pull over. So I think it's identifying your comfort zone, which I think Austin kind of nails right here. And sort of going like, I don't want to get to a point where I beat myself up over something that insignificant. But also, I don't want to just like slack forever and just go, I'm a fuck up.
Yeah, I think it's it's celebrating your victories and not letting your defeats kill you.
Yep.
Yeah, obviously this is a show where we take a very broad concept like disappointment and find out that it does not in fact exist in a vacuum and is in fact interwoven with myriad other concepts.
Yeah.
Disappointment's a huge one. Obviously it couldn't exist without expectations or without failure, but
So back to creative disappointment real quick. I want to say that this is one that we deal with a lot. Our audience deals with a lot. It's expecting an interview to go well, or a drawing to come out really good, or a song to go really well. By the way, I was thinking about this today. Drawings and songs are such weird, different things to be disappointed in yourself in, because a drawing is finished in a very different way than a song is finished. Like a song has a finite stop, whereas a drawing is something you look on top down. And you're like, well, when do I stop making lines over here? Yeah. Whereas a drawing is a timeline.
At the same time, also
a song is a timeline.
A song ideally is something that you don't. I mean, maybe it has lyrics and maybe it tells a story or it has a message of some sort, or maybe it's supposed to sound like something or be evocative of something. But there's no it's a lot simultaneously more and less structured.
Yeah.
Like it's got to sound good, but you can't really quantify that. Whereas if you're like, I'm going to draw a picture of the girl I have a crush on, and it doesn't fucking look like her, and you look at one of those Napoleon Dynamite sketches.
Have you ever done one of those things? Has anyone ever posed for you and you've spun the thing around and they've been like, oh?
I specifically don't do that. Like,
yeah.
I mean, Jen's like, why don't you ever draw me? Why don't you ever draw girls? And I'm like, I can't draw girls because they're very pretty and I don't draw.
And scary.
It would be mean for me to try to draw girls. It's
right.
not fair. So I draw like ogres and stuff.
Yeah, I had this thing in art class where I was just drawing like the structural beams and pipes, because in New York City they're all exposed in all the studios. And then the teacher came around, and actually the model would come around every now and then and look at people's drawings, which I was just like, I understand why you're doing this, but this is crushing me, because like you're naked and you have to see that I think your boobs look weird. Mm-hmm. Not that I think that, but my hand does when it draws them. And she came around and she was just like, ah. And I was like, I'm sorry, like I drew you as like a amorphous blob down here, but then I fucking nailed the structural beams.
Yeah.
Like those are beautiful. And that gets very difficult to do. But I think one of the most disappointing things you can do creatively is get stuck in development hell. And that is when you are basically locked into a fear of disappointing yourself or others, and you keep something from ever being released.
That's why we finally made this fucking show.
Seriously.
We made this show, and it's called Weird Heat, and it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, and it's got a very, very shaky mission statement. What are we doing? It's a show about creating things and about everything and about life. That's not a very good elevator pitch, but we put it out there and we started making it, which we weren't doing when it was called Kidults, a show about growing up and stuff, or Show and Tell, which was this massive collaboration that was going to be, I think, like a record label / storytelling show / art gallery / dog Instagram or something. Like we had it was like 8 people's ideas, the whole like a camel is a horse designed by committee approach to things. So, Weird Heat might be like rough around the edges, but we're putting it out there so it can kind of breathe and take shape, and we can figure out what to do with it. Yeah, and like I think it's like what we said before, right? There is that the joy and energy you get from making something, multiplied by that kind of crystallized feeling of confidence that it's going to be awesome. But then you get to a finish line and you have to decide, like, was the art or was the endeavor, was the process the thing I was looking for, or is the release and the response the thing I'm looking for? And if it's the latter, then you just got to get it out there. And then if people are disappointed, like that's okay, because you can't. If you live in fear of that, you will never release anything. Everything will be in development hell. You will never ship a thing. And I think we talked about like the narcissistic, cocky people at the start of this episode. You kind of have to be 10% that. There's a little bit of don't give a fuckery that happens. Well, I mean, it's also when you're ready to put something out. C's get degrees. Yeah. Just ship it. Yeah. Finish it, Exactly. So to close off here, let's get personal real quick. What is your like personal biggest disappointment? And is it something that you still carry, that still impacts the way you live today? So it's tricky. I grew up in Connecticut. My family is sort of from there originally. Little town in the kind of the northwest corner. I actually have a tattoo of Connecticut right here on my arm. It's hard to tell because I gave it bat wings.
Is it a razor blade?
It's shaped like an angular pork chop.
Okay,
it's also, I got it kind of as a joke because Connecticut's not a cool state. It's kind of a lame state.
I always thought it was a razor blade. I actually had no idea.
No, that's
I've been friends with you for a long time.
The state of Connecticut.
Yeah, I thought it was a razor blade with pipe cleaners and bat wings.
They're like laurel leaves because you're like, oh, like Connecticut. And it's got the thing that's on Mum Ra's chest and Thundercats on it. Anyway, it's a weird tattoo, but I got it because I have this sort of like this special place in my heart for Connecticut, and I love it. I moved to California when I was 14, effectively at the start of high school, and for a lot of like, if you're a dorky kid growing up in Connecticut, I think the idea of being able to uproot and move to California and do this whole like Ralph Macchio Karate Kid like transplant is like probably like you get pretty much a blank canvas.
Right.
And as opposed to showing up and being like, okay, I can reinvent myself, I'm going to be cool, I'm going to start fresh. Instead, I was like, yeah, man, this place sucks. Connecticut's the best. Let me tell you why Connecticut is the shit. Which no one has ever said. So, I mean, that's kind of the thing is so many people have tattoos of California because California is arguably a cool state.
Right.
It's where they like make like weed and movies and surfboards. Like it's full of fruit and like skateboarding ramps and shit.
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast, and there was like this enigma to it. It was this unreachable. Everyone was constantly partying with sunglasses and shorts, and there were beautiful women everywhere.
There's Malibu Barbie. There's not like New Haven Barbie. That's like nobody gives a shit if like the best thing Connecticut has going for it is fucking Yale, and even that's a second-rate Harvard.
Or WWE.
Yeah, which is doesn't even they pretend that they're probably from like Texas or something.
Third best pizza in the tri-state area.
Yeah, pretty
arguably.
much. But yeah, I'm not going to fight you on that. That's where the movie Mystic Pizza took place.
It's great pizza. Really good pizza.
Is, I mean, you could say that it's a disappointing state. It's fine. It's whatever. It's cool.
You can tell it is when people, because I had a friend in college who was like, I'm from Connecticut, connect, I cut throats. And I was like, that's not
no,
working.
that's a stretch.
It's not. I mean, I get like when people are like, Toronto, T-Dot. I'm like, that works a little. That's cool. You're cooling that up, I think you have Drake and stuff. But Connect Eye Cutthroats was just like,
no, honey, no.
Like you're trying to give yourself a nickname.
No, crumple that one up and hide it in the old Charter Oak. That's no one needs to read that.
Is that a Connecticut tree?
That's a nice shout out to the Charter Oak, the most exciting tree in Connecticut. It's on the quarter. It's fucking stupid. They like hid like a manuscript in there or something.
Is that their thing?
It's not there. There's no thing.
Okay,
there's like nutmeg. Anyway, the point is, I've since come to terms with the fact that Connecticut is like not the most thrilling state. I know like a handful of things about it, and I like it there. There's some cool stuff. I like my hometown. I like the stuff from my family that sort of came from there.
Was it going back and revisiting it that showed you like it's different than what you expected?
Well, exactly. I spent 3 years of high school being like, yo, California's fine, but hell is a stupid word, and Connecticut's way better. Back there, everything, and I just make up this shit about like all this stuff. And the thing is, I didn't have a good time in Connecticut either. It's like totally the grass is always greener mentality. Yeah. And I like hype myself up to be like, I'm gonna go back to Connecticut where I'm from, and I'm gonna be like this. I did basically the opposite, where I'm like, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna be like, I've lived in California for 3 years. I know it's cool. I've been living in California, and I got back there and I spent the summer fucking around with my my best friend, and his sister had crashed his car like a week before I got there. And so we were basically like on not house arrest, but we were kind of like locked down. So we had this whole idea in our head of like, we're going to go on like a road trip. We're going to go on adventures. We're going to like screw around. And he's like, hey, I actually don't have a car. So like we gotta borrow my mom's car and she needs it for work. So we're, and yep. It went from like kind of like up here to down to here. And then he's like, hey, I gotta pay off some college loans. I gotta go work for my uncle this week. And so I'd be like, oh, it's cool, man. And it was incredibly disappointing is what it was. And I'm not mad at him for that. It was like he had to go deal with shit. And I'd been living in this fucking fantasy world of like, oh, I'm going to go back to my like home turf and I'm going to like kind of get a second chance at being there. And at one point I was in the sort of town like general store and I'd like grown a foot and I'd lost a bunch of weight. And I was like, in my head, I was like a cooler looking person, and I definitely, I'd made some, I'd leveled up a little bit. And then two dudes I'd gone to grade school with walked in, and instead of going up and being like, "Hey guys, it's me, Max. I haven't seen you in a while. Like, what's up? How's it going?" I just was like, play it cool, and I just didn't do anything, and I didn't talk to them, and I think I was gonna be like, they don't even recognize me, but they probably were like, "Is that Max Scoville?" And I don't know. I wound up coming back Like I basically went to Connecticut and I was like, I did all this. I tried to do all the stuff I was hoping to do, and then I came back home because I ran out of like graduation money and I'd set it up like I'm gonna go to Connecticut and I never know when I'm coming back. And I came back like 6 weeks later and I got my job at Tower Records back, and then I was like, well, fuck, what now?
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that disappointment did actually let me kind of go back to the drawing board and go, okay, what next? Now that I've got that cleared out, what do I do?
It also kind of let you let go of an ideal that you probably had of what a place was.
Yeah.
And say, okay, well, I don't, which is odd because you almost murdered the kind of mysticism and romanticism around it.
Can you imagine?
But that's kind of
can
cool.
you imagine if like Columbus had that level of like, oh well, shit, this is different from I expected. If he'd be like, I'm gonna go find a shortcut to India for spices and silks, and then he gets to America and he goes, oh, I'm terribly sorry. I completely didn't realize there was a continent here. Apologies, sorry, and then just went back to Europe and it's like, no go, it's somebody else's over there. Would have a different fucking Earth.
Yeah, very different Earth.
Yeah.
A lot of people would have had a better week.
Yeah, that would have been a little bit less disappointing than being like, it's India too.
They were like, it's not India. And he was like, it's India.
It's India-ish.
So that was, I mean, I guess for him that was making the best of a bad situation. And that was terrible for everyone else. So, yeah, that's pretty tough.
Yeah. Not really a good comparison there at all.
No, that was rough.
No,
Man,
I don't know. But I mean, I don't know. It's if you can be honest with yourself about your failures and your disappointments and go, whose fault is this? Like, is it my fault? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's my fault for inflating Connecticut in my head to these like, just epic standards of like what this place would be. And I go back there and I'm like, it's Connecticut. It's fine. It's the Constitution state.
Right.
Like it's not. If I'd been like, I'm gonna go spend time with my friend, then I'm gonna have a nice summer, I wouldn't have been disappointed. But instead, I hyped it up to be this like epic journey, my homeland, back to like this foreign soil full of like magical things. And then instead, I was like,
but again, it allowed you to sort of close that chapter on Connecticut, but sort of close that astronomically high vision of of how great it was and everything.
I mean, it took 3 years, but I kind of finally realized that like, oh shit, like California's home now, and I live over here, so I got to go back there and work at Tower Records for a few years or whatever.
Yeah, so. I think my biggest disappointment, and it's weird now because I'm happily married, I have a kid coming along the way. Spoilers if you missed the first episode, but I was in a very long relationship in high school and college that went from being like two high school sweethearts to being like two people in a long distance relationship from New York and Rhode Island. And I would go visit her on the weekends. And then we got out of college and came back together in our home, in the hometown that we had first met in. And we were just kind of different people and older. And, we just kind of got like, not bored of each other, but you just like, it just becomes sort of a routine, right? And you're young and you're broke. You're in that weird age where you're like, well, we can't go on vacations. We can't do all the cool shit that people in their 30s can do. We're in our early 20s and we have to make a relationship thrive. And we got in an argument and broke up, which is something we'd done 10 times. So it happened a lot. And this time it was permanent. And I didn't realize at the time, that's the end of it. And then a day or two went by, and then 3 or 4 days went by, and I remember bringing my phone with me everywhere. I would bring the landline and my cell phone into the bathroom and put them on top of the sink to stare at them while I took a shower, at the off chance that one of them would light up.
Man,
because I was thinking she was gonna call me back and fix things, and I kept leaving messages and being like, let's try this, and I'm really sorry we fought, and I'm sorry we broke up, but I'm ready to do this and this. And it was sort of like a mutual breakup thing, but I just remember being crushed with disappointment in myself for not being able to keep something that was really important to me for so long going. And then it made me go was all my time wasted in high school? Was all my time wasted in college? And not in a way of I could have had sex with 100 women, but wow, I invested so much emotionally into this situation, and then I failed. I failed it.
Yeah.
And it took me a very long time to realize that it's kind of important to have a young kind of failed relationship like that, because it makes you better at the next one and the next one.
Exactly. But I mean, look at the Max Landis, this could be my Star Wars. No, it won't. because Star Wars is already a thing to you, you
Right.
know? And like the relationship you're in now, you're happily married, you're expecting a child. That wouldn't be the relationship that you're in if you hadn't had that first one.
Right.
And I
right.
think that that's one of the most upsetting things about breakups when you're younger is that you don't know, there's no end goal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like my first girlfriend, like the first serious one, the first one I was like, oh, I love you. She's like, I love you too. And we're like, oh my God. And then we're like, well, shit, we're locked in. Like, what do we do? Like, we're
Now
here
what?
and it's here for the long run. And like, I mean, I know that's scary for people when they, like, attraction is terrifying. And that, like, what's the plan? You know, there's that whole, like, so what are we doing exactly?
Mm-hmm.
And like, really, you kind of have to just let go and let it happen.
Right.
And I don't know. At the same time, you learned you became a different person through that letdown and through that breakup.
Yeah, because you kind of have to, and it's really interesting because it's like every couple of years or sometimes even months, like she'll shoot me a text or I'll shoot her a text, and we're both like very much capable of understanding that we were immensely important to each other for a long time, and we wouldn't be who we are without each other. But also, we are so goddamn happy that we're not together anymore. Because we fought over the stupidest shit. We're both happily married, you know, with children or children on the way. And we can identify that. But it takes sometimes days, weeks, months, years, decades to look back and be like, that failure was the best thing that happened to me. That failure was the most important thing to happen to me. You know, like sometimes not getting a job can lead to a better one. Or, you know, getting dumped can lead to you being happier. Or you walking away from a friend can lead to 3 friends that you maybe never would have spent time with. And that is disappointment spawning sort of compassion and creativity and the energy to keep going. Instead of just being like, dating's not for me. Or working is something I don't do. Or I fail at friendship, so I give up on them. I think you have to learn from those things and keep going. There are things that are finite in that I will not be a good guitarist again. But I'll find a cool guitar synth and I'll work it into one of my songs.
Sure.
I failed at that relationship, but that doesn't mean I never want to ever talk to another girl again. You know, it means that I want it to grow to become something better. So I identify those things, I guess, right? And sort of say, like, what is it that I want to leave behind forever that I learned from? And what is it that I want to take those failures and build into the person that I want to become next, which is a moving target, obviously.
Sure. And also recognize that chaos is all around us. You know, there's that John Lennon quote, like, life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Yep.
And, you know, don't set your expectations too high and you won't be a victim of disappointment. And then again, you might still be a victim of disappointment because you pictured anything. So don't picture anything. But still, plan ahead because the future is important.
It's true.
Always have a concrete five-year plan. Just always lock that down.
5 to 10,
and
10 to 20 years. Just figure it all out right now.
Just try to be pointed in the right direction and don't kill anybody.
And don't make a single mistake ever. No,
Unless you do, and then it's fine.
It's
but
totally fine. It's
don't
okay.
kill anybody.
I think I was looking at the screen and not the camera.
That happens.
How disappointing. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to our episode on disappointment. I hope we didn't disappoint you. I'm Brian Altano, that's Max Scoville, and we are Weird Heat. Weird Heat is a show you can get right here on YouTube or iTunes or Amazon or anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Are we on Amazon? I don't know if
Yeah.
we're on Amazon.
Well, we have music on there.
Okay, we have music on Amazon. If you listen to a thing on a place, that we're probably on there in some sense. We're trying to get on SoundCloud. I think the music is on there, but not the podcast because they have to approve it personally.
We're learning.
Anyway.
You can support the show at patreon.com/weirdheat. It's how we got some of the quotes and anecdotes that we used in this episode, and I'd like to keep doing more stuff like that. So hop in there. There's lots of cool stuff behind the scenes. On top of that, you can follow us on Twitter. That's twitter.com/weirdheat or
We're
at
also
weirdheat.
on Instagram, which is Weird Heat. Tumblr, which is Instagram. Facebook, which is facebook.com/weirdheatstudio. There's a Facebook group, which is called Weird Heat, and people are joining up in there and kind of hanging out and sharing the stuff they're creating and working on and being disappointed by, you know, or being optimistic about, whichever.
Yeah.
And
weirdheat.com, where you can get T-shirts, merchandise, cool stuff we're selling. We put new designs up there pretty regularly, so keep checking in. And seriously, thank you so much for letting us do the show and for allowing us a place to just sort of like swim around in these concepts, because it's really cathartic and it's really cool, and it's reaching a lot of you. So thanks for being there. Thanks for letting us disappoint you.
Yeah, that's really the most important thing you can do for another person, is to just allow them the opportunity to disappoint. So
That's right. And
you
remember,
you took a shot.
DISS.
No, don't. You are gonna totally fuck up so many people's expectations of how that word is spelled.
Ointment. Disappointment.
Ugh.